Welcome to the Living Your Greatness podcast. I am your host, Ben Mummy. The purpose of the podcast is to inspire millions of people across the world to achieve greatness and enhance their overall personal well-being. Living Your Greatness is becoming the go-to resource that CEOs, elite athletes, professional coaches, and entrepreneurs rely on to upgrade themselves. The podcast helps you master the best of what other people have already figured out. So I gladly invite you to sit back, relax, and enjoy tuning in to today's episode. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Living Your Greatness. This is your host, Ben Mummy, and today we have a new guest to the show, and his name is Richard Koestner. So for those of you that don't know Richard, he's a professor of psychology at McGill University. He completed his education at the University of Rochester and Harvard University. Richard founded the McGill Human Motivation Lab 30 years ago and has partnered with the Black Community Resource Center to examine the impact of the COVID pandemic on Black young adults. In 2021, Richard won the Canadian Psychology Association's Donald Hebb Award for distinguished contributions to psychology as a science. Richard also won the McGill University Award for excellence in teaching and training. He has supervised over 30 successful Ph.D. students and more than 300 honor students. Richard is also one of the world-leading thinkers of the science behind the self-determination theory, and his recent work focuses on how to distinguish between personal and collective motivation. So Richard, welcome to the show. I'm really excited to have a chat with you today.
Thank you very much, and thanks for that introduction.
Super stoked to have you on the show. And if we could start off, tell us a little bit about yourself. Where did you spend your formative years growing up? And what inspired you to become an award-winning teacher, researcher, and a world-class leader of the self-determination theory?
I've sometimes been asked to explain how I ended up where I am, and there was no plan to it at all. It was just accidental twists and turns. So I grew up in New York City. I have immigrant parents who are from Austria. I was a good student. I went to a high school that emphasized doing things for other people, so I became interested in social work and psychology. I wanted to go away to university. That was the movie Animal House was very popular when I was 18 years old, and I wanted to go to a fun university and get away from home, but I ended up my parents asked that I stay in New York with them, and I went to Columbia for 2 years. And after 2 years, I realized I had to get away, and I didn't decide until March of 1978. And the only university in New York State that still would accept applications was the University of Rochester. So I applied there, I got in, I went there. And it turns out that the very first class I took was with a man named Ed Deasy, who is the founder of a remarkable theory called self-determination theory. It wasn't widely known back in 1978. It was just beginning. But I worked with him as an undergraduate and then became a Ph.D. student. And it was just by chance that I ended up there. And this great new theory was forming. And so I got in at the ground level. I'm not one of the leaders. The leaders are Ed Deasy and Rich Ryan, but I was one of the first students, and I've trained a lot of people in the theory, and I think we've made some contributions. But the theory is quite impressive. It's an amazing partnership between Ed Deasy and Rich Ryan that's lasted probably 50 years now, and they built a theory where there's probably, I would say, 1,000 professors around the world using it in various ways, and it's applicable. Long story short, I was lucky to get in with two people who became leaders of the field.
That's awesome, Richard. Yeah, thanks for giving us, that storyline, of your humble beginning and profs are kind of mentors in your life, that had that impact. And then I'm glad too from there that kind of like you said, yeah, it's had a lot of impact on people. Even when I was at McGill University and I studied phys ed and kin, which I had shared with you earlier on, we actually studied it, right? Because motivation, if you think about it, all humans, we all have a sense of kind of motivation and stuff. So we're going to dive a little bit more into that. And actually, like, my next question that I kind of want to go from there is, I think it's important that my listeners have a better understanding of what exactly is the self-determination theory. So from my understanding, and you could correct me if I'm wrong, the self-determination theory suggests that all humans have three basic psychological needs. So there's autonomy, there's competence, and there's relatedness. And this kind of underlines our growth of development. So my question is, what else could you tell us about this theory?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for asking. And that's exactly right. I usually list the three needs in terms of autonomy, relatedness, and competence. And I do that because they're mnemonic then, ARC, which is ARC. And what I suggest is the ARC of our experience in any given situation, or the arc of our experience during the pandemic, let's say, is determined by the extent to which we were able to satisfy our needs for autonomy, relatedness, and competence. So autonomy is the focus of self-determination theory. It's what's unique. The relatedness and competence, there's many other psychological theories like attachment theories, self-efficacy theory that put those needs at the forefront. So autonomy is the one that we're especially interested in, and other theorists don't really make much of it. Some people think it's like culturally determined, that in the West we care about autonomy, but not in the East, and things of that sort. The self-determination theory would suggest that we need to feel like actors in our own lives. We need to feel like agents. We need to feel like our thoughts and feelings and interests are behind the things we do, and that we endorse the actions that we take. And what's surprising is that in many of our lives, we don't feel like an agent or an origin. We actually feel like we're just following the rules, or people are pushing us, or quite often we're striving for things that we've been told that we should strive for, and we just kind of learn to do it without considering, boy, is this really what I want to be striving for? So the focus is on whether we kind of have reflected, we've thought about our own needs and interest, and whether our goals and behaviors flow from that. When we feel autonomous, that means that we wholeheartedly kind of stand behind the things we're doing. So if you feel autonomous about your work, that means you're not conflicted, you're not alienated. I mean, you may have some things you don't like, but you know this is what you want to do. It's really what's interesting to you and what's valuable to you. So that's autonomy. The next need is relatedness, which is defined as feeling connected to other people and feeling that they care about you too. So there has to be some reciprocity. And it doesn't have to be a lot of people. Everyone doesn't have to like us. You just need some people who you care about and they care about you, and it's reciprocal. Competence means that we can do things well, we can master things. And here it's not important to be the tops all the time. What's actually more important is to feel like you're learning and improving and you have the capacity to do that. So there's autonomy, there's relatedness, and there's competence. And I would say that the arc of our experiences are determined by whether those three needs are satisfied or they're thwarted, because that can happen. So take the example of my daughter goes to a preschool. She comes home the first week, and I'm kind of looking to see how her three needs are doing. Does she feel like she has some input? She can express her interests at school. That's autonomy. Does she feel connected to some of the other kids? Does she feel like she's gaining skills? And to the extent that autonomy, relatedness, and competence are being taken care of, I can expect that Sophie will be interested, she'll be motivated, she'll learn, she'll grow. Unfortunately, if you send your kids to grade schools, what you'll often find is they might have a teacher or a classroom where the teacher will use stickers and rewards, and the kids will begin to be worried about whether they're going to get the reward or not. And instead of feeling autonomous, they're going to feel pressured and controlled. And in some classrooms, there's a lot of competition, or maybe there's bullying. And there, the kids won't feel a sense of relatedness. And competence, that can vary too. So the fundamental thing is that there's these three basic needs, and it's really important in all of the spheres of our life that we feel like these needs are being satisfied. And what you have to consider is that there are forces out there that are acting against the satisfaction of our needs. And the best example I would give you, Ben, is this is the reason I became interested in self-determination theory, is that many of the things that adults think to use to motivate kids, like offering stickers, offering rewards, emphasizing grades, many of those things actually backfire, and kids care about them, but by caring about them so much and striving to win the approval of parents or teachers, they're actually losing sight of what's interesting and meaningful to them, and they're losing the capacity to regulate based on their own sense of what's important and interesting. So I've always been fascinated by the idea that most of what we do as adults with kids backfires. And the three examples I use are using rewards when kids are already interested, to use praise that focuses on how, what great ability they have and how marvelous they are, and then introduce a competition. A lot of adults think that competition will bring out the best in our children. Sometimes it might, but it's important that the competition be perceived in terms of challenge rather than control and pressure and winning at all costs. And if you've been reading the stories in the Quebec news about what it's like to be a figure skater, or an elite figure skater, or an elite horse jumper, or elite gymnast, you're aware of the fact that competition can become like really controlling and pressurized, and that the kids who get caught up in this, they sacrifice a lot and they suffer a lot. And I don't think they actually experience a lot of autonomy, relatedness, and competence. So I think what really interested me, and I'm overstating it, most teachers and parents are fine, but I think there is a tendency to look too much to try to motivate kids from outside, and not to consider that most kids are interested and they're oriented toward wanting to learn and wanting to self-regulate as they learn, rather than just trying to get the rewards or win the competitions all the time.
There's a lot to unpack there because, yeah, like I find it's too external and sometimes result focused. And I think result is good to a certain extent for feedback, but it shouldn't be the end all. It should be more about, I think, the process, right? Or becoming better, or becoming more motivated to learn, or aspects like that, where it's more intrinsically, driven, right? And autonomous. And, you spoke about those three things, and I just kind of want to highlight them again, right? One of them was autonomy, and the feeling that they actually have the choice or willingness, right, to endorse their own behavior, right?
Yeah.
And then I think you did a good job too with, relatedness, right? That they feel the need to feel connected and belonging, with others, right? And then the third one, which ends up leading to the motivation, which is competence, right? The experience of mastering and being effective in one's activity, right? And I love how you gave those examples. And more importantly, I know even when you teach your students, you break down whether it's a musician or whether it's a world-class athlete, you break down these people that they don't need to be that level. They don't need to be world-class, but to break down how do they get there using these three things of kind of human motivation. Yeah. So I appreciate you for really getting into that and kind of explaining it. So Richard, something that I want to move to, because we're talking about human motivation, and like the quality of motivation, whether it's
Key word, yeah.
yeah. So whether it's autonomous or controlled, it is key for both satisfaction as well as sustained success in achieving one's goals. Do you think people feel more pressure or control to behave in a certain way, or do people feel that they have a choice to behave?
Yeah, I'll give you another example because I think it's really interesting. So for the last 12 years, my lab has focused on goal setting. And early December is an interesting time to talk about goals because January 1st, historically, is a time when many of us kind of reset. We reflect on the past year and we say, oh boy, I should be exercising more, or I should be doing more for the environment. And we set new goals. So about 20 years ago, I did my first study and we asked people what their New Year's resolutions are, say. And most people have 2 or 3. Not everyone sets resolutions. Some people have given up on them because most of us know that we usually, actually almost always, we fail. So it's kind of discouraging. But if we set resolutions, we ask people, what are your reasons? And this is the key thing. This theory suggests there are many different kinds of motivation, and some of those kinds are better than others. So I can say, so my resolution, let's see, do I have a new one? Yeah, I want to run a half marathon this year. I actually tried last year and injury interfered. So I want to run a half marathon. Then you ask people, well, are you doing it for this reason, or this reason? The best reason is this is interesting. This is going to be fun. I'm going to feel great. I'm going to enjoy the training. That's really good. Another reason is what we call identified, where, boy, this would be really meaningful. At my age, I'm a 60-year-old guy. To run a marathon, a half marathon would be showing that I'm still vital. Now that's getting a third reason would be something about guilt and I'm slowing down. I want to prove that I can still do it. I want to show other people. And that's becoming more pressured, and that's changing. And then a fourth reason would be to get a reward or to impress other people or something of that sort. So we have these reasons, and some are really personal and have to do with autonomy, but others are more outside the individual. And what we find is most of our New Year's resolutions, the forces are outside of us. They're not really autonomous. They're more controlled. But if you can sort out someone who has 2 resolutions and one is really more autonomous, it's about interest and value, that's the one that we're likely to be able to persist with, because it's really hard to stay with a goal over time. You have a background in kinesiology and exercise and sports, I'm sure. And what you'll see in January is that at the YMCA or a fitness center, there's a lot of new people there. You can't get on the machines you used to use. And you think, oh my, this is going to be a crowded experience. But most of those people are gone by February 1st or March 1st. And that's because any goal will have obstacles, will get distracted, and it just won't stick. And what we find is it's that autonomous motivation that allows us to stay with the goal through the ups and downs, to get past the obstacles and the distractions. So I think the key thing is to think about the different kinds of motivations. And unfortunately, we have multiple kinds, and a lot of them are the negative, where we feel pressured or obliged or like others want us to do it. New Year's resolutions, a lot of it is you're doing it because you think others want you to do it or you should do it.
Absolutely. And you know what I love? There was so much that you said there that I'm in agreement with, but I love that you really highlighted like the whole New Year's resolution, classic, just because I feel like there's a mindset shift that people need to better understand, and especially people that are listening right now. When it comes to, let's say, physical activity, right, and designing a goal, you should want to rethink what you're doing, how you want to feel, right? And that goes with
Yeah.
autonomy, right? So if you're someone that's adventurous, or you like rhythm, or you like being outdoors, then maybe running or cycling or cross-country
Yeah. Yeah.
skiing are a better fit for you, no pun intended.
Yeah.
And then kind of like you said, like you gave that example at the gym where sometimes people are so result focused that they forget about, well, do they even like, picking weights up and putting it back down? And if they do, they might love that feeling and they want to crave it again and again and again, right? And so this kind of leads me to my next question, because I think goals, if we want to stay motivated, yes, we want the autonomy, kind of like you said, there's other areas that we explored, but I think it also comes down from our values as well. So how could the everyday person, best motivate themselves to pursue valued goals?
Yeah. We're trying to study that right now. And I'm trying to do this in my own life. So I think one of the ideas we have, for example, is that if you ask me to list my three goals, I'll give you something about sports, something about work, something about relationships, and those will be my three goals. But in the background, I also care about social justice, uh, systemic racism. I care about climate change. And I have values that would lead me to want to do something in those areas. The problem is, I'm kind of focused on my personal goals and the areas that I'm more familiar with, like, exercising, eating the right things. But what I'm trying to think through is how do I pay attention to some like really important moral goals that I care about, but that I don't do so much with, that are kind of in the background. And uh, I think most young people at McGill and many universities, they really care about climate change and systemic racism and social justice. And some of them are doing things, but many of us are not. And which I'm trying to figure out what the barrier is. I think with climate change, it's just so big sometimes that we think, whether I do this little thing, it will make much of a difference. And the same with social justice issues. But I do think it requires reflecting on what you care about. And what I'm trying to do is to ask myself, why am I not doing anything? Or how can I start? What would be a small way to begin to do it? Uh, and, I've talked with the people in my lab, and I think uh, with the environment, some of us care more about one kind of thing. So I have a good friend who's a collaborator, and he's the same age as me, and he really cares about wasting food. And he lives in the Boston area, and it drives him crazy that restaurants and supermarkets throw out a lot of food that could be useful to people who are living in poverty or on the street. So he's part of an organization where he goes and he picks up the food and he takes it to another place where it's cleaned up, and then it can be given to people who might need it. And he does that, every week for 4 hours. And it's not going to save the world, but he feels like he's living his values, and he's found a way of doing it that fits with what he especially cares about. And I think if each of us found something like that, uh, so an idea I had, I know I go up on Mount Royal and I cross country ski there, but every year, twice a year, they invite people to come up and clean up the park. And people go up there and just of their own time. And I haven't done it yet, but I was thinking, I love the park so much, I should get involved in that. And there is an organization, Friends of the Park. So I, like you said, with sports, it's a matter of finding the thing you think you'd best like to do and that suits you, and then getting yourself to do it, maybe with other people. That makes it even better. And our hunch is that it will make us feel better about the way we're living if some of these back burner kind of moral values issues if we bring them more into our lives and we find small ways at least to feel like we're doing something.
Yeah, Richard, thanks for clarifying that, how we link our values, to our goals. You brought up some great examples there. And something that I actually want to shift to, I know in your human psychology course that you teach at McGill University, you have them read The Talent Code by Daniel Coyle. And, that's a great book. I read it myself. It was actually my sister who was in your class that recommended it to me at the time. But do you believe greatness is born or is it grown? And are there any inspiring stories that you would like to share, from a world-class performer?
That's a really important question, and a lot of people are really interested in it. I don't use the Dan Coyle book anymore because the leading researcher in that area wrote a book himself, Carl Anders Ericsson, and it's really great. And he says everything I wish I could say. So I used that book for the last couple of years. But it was a very controversial theory, the idea that natural talent isn't the key to becoming an outstanding performer like Sidney Crosby or Michael Jordan, and that something else is important. I tend to like Ericsson's theory. He really provides pretty compelling evidence. The critical thing, when you look very carefully, is something he calls deliberate practice, which involves being shown by someone who's an expert exactly the kinds of activities you need to do to improve your skill. And the thing he says is that this deliberate practice is not really so much fun. It's actually a lot of repetition. It's pushing yourself even when it's getting difficult or boring. In fact, the key is always to be on that edge, that challenge edge, where you're always making it more difficult. Now, what I do with my class is I talk about Ericsson's research, and then after describing his research and his evidence, I say, I'm not sure if he's right that natural talent is unimportant. But there's other research which suggests that the way we should live our lives and the way we should teach our children is we should let them believe that talent or ability is a changeable, fungible, malleable thing, and that it's not fixed. And it's not the case that some people are born to become great. And that, in fact, you could make a counter argument that, for example, in music, most of the young kids who are prodigies, many of them don't go on to become great adult performers. And many of the great adult performers weren't identified as child prodigies. There's a lot of things that can go wrong. So I tend to think that for most of us, it's helpful to view our abilities as not fixed, but changeable. And the example I like most is math, because everyone listening to your podcast, they think probably about their school experience and they think, yeah, I was a good student, but oh boy, I wasn't so good at math. Or I was good at math and then I hit my limit and I couldn't manage once I got beyond algebra or something. And there's a book written by a Canadian philosopher about math and how there's an illusion that it's all about ability. And he actually started teaching math, and he has a way of teaching it where it's built on micro steps and a lot of deliberate practice all the way along. And what he finds is that for many of us, it's just that with math, it's so linear that if you get lost, you're not going to be able to pick it up. But that really good teaching can help most of us learn algebra, learn geometry, do calculus. But instead, we think, oh boy, we just didn't have it. We had it for a while, but we didn't have that deeper level of math ability. And I think in most cases, it's better if we consider the possibility that if we had more input from someone else, if we had different kind of teaching, if we used different strategies, and if we gave some of those things a try, perhaps we would have been able to get past our freshman math class. And I know myself, and you've probably had this too, I took up swimming at the age of 40. I didn't think I could swim, but I wanted to do a triathlon. I took up downhill skiing at the age of 55. Now, in neither of those activities am I very good, but I can do them. And if you think your ability is fixed, you won't even get to the point where you could do it and have fun doing it. So I generally think for the average person, it's much better for us to believe that it's not so much talent. It's more about having some good teachers, learning some good practice activities, finding a way to do it that's fun and interesting so that you keep doing it. So, but this is a controversial area, and I know some people really do believe there's genetic differences and other kinds of things.
Yeah, no, I want to highlight something that you said, which was being very deliberate, right? And the practice of that. And like you also said, right, having other exterior, support, mastering coaching, stuff like that. But it made me think of like, any skill set, right? It starts with the mindset, right?
Yeah.
And so kind of like you said, right, not having a fixed mindset, being open to, it's okay at the start, to suck at math. It's okay at the start to suck at podcasting. If I look at my first podcast and I look where I am now, I'm still so far from where I'm going. But the growth, because I put in the reps, because I cared to deliberately get better, so it's not just putting in the time. Yeah, I've put in time for sure, but you got to do with quality as well too. And you get better and better and better, right? And so we could apply that. And what I love about it, we could apply that into anything in our life, whether it's cooking, whether it's learning a musical instrument, like you said, like even now, like you're trying to become a better runner and, hit that half marathon level. Right. So I love the process. Like I'm in love with the process of becoming better at whatever you're trying to become.
Yeah.
And I think that's like the message that, you were kind of highlighting there. And so I love that we see head to head on that.
And you used, I didn't use the word you used, which is having a growth mindset. And I'll just use an example too. I don't know if you're a Montreal Canadiens fan, but they have the marvelous new coach named Martin St. Louis, who's the most growth-oriented coach I've ever seen. He just cares about development. He cares a little bit about winning, but he has a young team who have no chance of going to the playoffs. But he just cares about and the organization has changed. They fired the previous administration, and the previous administration didn't really help their players grow. And you could see that the new coach, the new general manager, that's what they're focused on. And not only are you seeing the players grow, you could see that they're enjoying it and they're feeling good about themselves and what they're working on. And it's much less demanding and pressure-filled. And it's very refreshing to see. And he's marvelous to listen to. If you ever watch the post-game interviews, Martin said he's very reflective and thoughtful, and he's so growth-oriented.
I definitely love that, Richard. And I think that was a good example that you brought up, with Martin St. Louis. Maybe I'll have him on like the show one day. I know I have a lot of Montreal listeners, so I think they'd appreciate that, or anyone that's into hockey or sports or just curious to learn. So Richard, something that I want to move to, and, we kind of were starting to hit it here. How do the best performers in anything, right? In sports, art, music, math, or just about anything, go from good to great?
I think the best performers are probably really honest with themselves about where they're at and where they want to get to and what they have to do to get there. And I think they're always interested in learning new training methods. So in my class, I show Steph Curry doing his dribbling. Like I played high school basketball and we dribbled in and out of cones. He does 2 basketballs at a time while an assistant coach is throwing a ball at him, and he has to catch the ball and throw it back, and there's strobe lights, and they're always looking for new training techniques. There was this story in a couple of years ago in the I think Journal de Montreal about Sidney Crosby was vacationing with his girlfriend in the Laurentians, and he was driving by and he saw a young guy playing hockey on an outdoor rink, and he stopped and he went up to the young guy and he introduced himself and said, there's something I'm working. This was during a 1-week break, and he wanted to work with the guy on a specific thing where he comes from behind the net on a certain side and he tries to do something, and he just kept going over and over and over. And this is Sidney Crosby, who's one of the greatest in the world. He's been a pro for 12, 15 years already, but on his holiday, he still found some like 20-year-old junior player to practice this with. So I think there's a willingness to always think about new ways of learning and doing things better. My hunch, too, is that something that's special is that practice is effortful and difficult. So if you have the capacity to do effortful, difficult things, that helps. But if you can also make it into fun. So I know you probably know more of these kind of people who they go to the gym, they train with their friends, and they're able to make it into a fun and interesting routine. And that makes it so much easier to persist with it, and you learn new things. And so it's really about this deliberate practice. Are you getting input from people who have expertise, who give you new ideas? And then are you finding ways to do it that's interesting and fun? And my hunch is that's the key.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I really like that you added that aspect of creativity, innovation, playfulness, right?
Yeah.
Because we all are, especially when we're younger, right? We're super curious, super playful, super, ask all these questions, right? And so I think that's another aspect that I do agree with you that needs to be integrated, and a lot of those, top individuals, like another example would be Alexei Kovalev, he played for the Montreal Canadiens. And I remember, this was probably around the time when I was starting to read your work and, some other books, but I remember like people always being like, he's so talented, and the word talent. And then I started to realize, he actually had this coaching video on all the deliberate skills that he worked to get so, we'll quote on the word talented, or that I would like to replace with great, as well as even like his fitness, how do I say, like cardiovascular ability. And like he was extremely fit too, especially when he was in his 40s, right? And so that's how he stood out. And, every player at that level, especially at the NHL, if you got there, you know how to skate, you know how to shoot, but there's those extra kind of.
No, I think that's a great example. And it's often been noticed that the European hockey players have incredible high-end skills. And I think the Canadian junior system took a look at that, and the training of young hockey players is different in Sweden versus in Canada, and the practices are different. And one of the key things is that in Europe, there's many fewer games and there's more practices. And the practices are very focused on skill development. It's not just scrimmages. And coming from Russia, I think that's very true as well. And so that Kovalev probably had some elite coaches who were teaching him things that maybe the ordinary Canadian junior player wouldn't get access to. But he was also smart enough to keep those videos and to keep watching. Because one of the mistakes we make, I've done this too, because I took golf lessons. I lowered my score by 10 strokes, and I thought, okay, I got it mastered now. 3 months later, I was back hitting the ball as badly as I was before. you not only have to learn these techniques, you have to reuse them. And for me, I just want to be a pretty good golfer. But if you want to be great, like you say, you not only have to reuse them, you have to find other people giving you some new strategies and to try them too.
Absolutely. And that also leads to, being a continuous learner, being
Yeah.
open, kind of like what we said before, having a growth mindset, right? So I think we could go on and on about that. And yeah, no, I appreciate you for sharing your input there. So Richard, something that I want to ask you, I ask all my guests that come on the podcast, the purpose of it is really to inspire millions of people to achieve greatness and enhance their overall personal well-being, by bringing on, I think, the best of the best that have figured something out. And so what is your definition of greatness?
Yeah, so I haven't thought about that so much. In my course, actually, what I do is I focus a lot on success and expertise in the first half of my motivation course. And I think I make people a little anxious because we're all worried about whether we're going to achieve what we're hoping we'll achieve. But in the second half, I kind of shift and say, no, it's really more about just sticking with things. So if you think about our kids and introducing them to sports and music, unfortunately, I think sometimes we're thinking, oh boy, what are they going to be really good at? And if they are good, we get so excited. But with kids, it's really about what are they going to enjoy? What's going to help them experience need satisfaction, autonomy, relatedness, and competence? And what are they going to keep doing throughout their adolescence, young adulthood, and the rest of their life? And so I think greatness is continuing to do the things you loved when you were younger. So I love basketball. You might have loved hockey. But what we see a lot, like, is kids, they do a lot with music. They reach a certain level. After high school, they never play the instrument again. A lot of youth sports, by the age of 13, 14, you top out and then you lose interest in it. I think greatness would be if we work with kids and we work with students in a way that they keep going. They keep going. And I think there's a danger sometimes in wanting to be like the very best. Because come on, very few of us are going to reach that. But if we're well-rounded, if we're satisfying our needs, and satisfying your needs means you're doing things with other people and you're connected. So I really focus more on staying with things that make you feel alive and that make you feel that you're growing, and also that can make you feel connected to others. And as long as we're doing that, we're doing great, is my feeling.
Absolutely. I love that. What a beautiful definition. And I think it makes me think too of, again, it's kind of embracing like the process, right? Your
Yeah, yeah,
passions, your
yeah,
childhood dreams,
yeah,
being authentically yourself. And I think beyond that, I think the biggest thing that I even got from that is it's all about the long game. It's not about
yeah.
the
No,
short
that's
game.
right.
It's not about getting six-pack abs in 30 days. It's about falling in love with a healthy relationship with fitness,
Yeah,
if
yeah.
you're trying to get great in that area, right? So I
It's
I
so
love that.
true. Yeah.
I love that. Awesome. So Richard, who is a future guest that you would like to see on this show?
Uh, I don't know if well, the people I studied with, Rich Ryan and Ed Deasy, but they would be hard to get a hold of. Uh, oh, I actually have a former student who, oh, she's great. Her name is Ann Holden. She's a postdoc now. She has her PhD. Amanda knows her. And her specialty is on letting go of goals. Because another crazy thing that happens if you play sports is you have to play through injuries. You should never give up. And there's a whole line of research that suggests with a lot of goals, the healthy thing is to let them go, especially if they've become controlled and pressured and other kinds of things. So she does some amazing things on a life course of pursuing goals. And She's a really good communicator. She has a young one, so she's pretty busy, but she might be you might ask Amanda about contacting Ann Holding, but she's very insightful about the challenges of pursuing goals and how sometimes disengaging is a healthier thing than persisting and damaging yourself in the process.
That's awesome. I thank you for all those recommendations, and I'd be more than happy or honored, to have a conversation with any of them. They all
Yeah.
sound like great people and have great wisdom and knowledge and stories to tell. So yeah, no, I appreciate you for kind of sharing that. And Richard, where is the best place for my listeners, to connect with you online?
Yeah, well, there's we have a website. It's the McGill Motivation Lab, and so that's probably the best way to get access to the work that my lab is doing and an overview on it. You can send me an email at richard.koestner@mcgill.ca. Now's a pretty busy time, but in another couple of weeks, I'll be back answering emails.
That's awesome, Richard. You truly are. I'm going to use her name because we've already said it on the podcast, but Amanda, who works closely with you, described you as very genuine, caring, kind. And I definitely felt that in this interview. And I also feel too, like it is a really busy time right now, like you said, with your finals as a prof, but your openness, to invite people even by email. And I actually want to take this last little bit of time, actually, to thank you, Richard, because that was how we connected. I wrote you a couple weeks back and, explained, the purpose of this conversation. And I was really, really pumped, when I got a reply back from you. So I want to take this last little moment of time, to really thank you for being here today. Thank you for sharing your knowledge, your wisdom, and as well as some of your passions, because I think a lot of the stuff that you shared, it lights you up.
Yeah, no, that's true. And talking to you lit me up too. It was, and I enjoyed your passion, and I think you have the same appreciation of a growth mindset and lifelong learning. So I think there's some common interest there. But it was a pleasure to do it, and thanks so much for giving me the opportunity.
Thank you for listening to the Living Your Greatness podcast. If this show has added some value, don't be shy to subscribe, leave a rating, and make a review.